Thank you so much for joining me. I can't actually believe that we're talking to each other. We met 20 years ago in a little village in South Africa.
Yes.
It's the same place where I met my now husband.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and
Wow.
we we haven't spoken since. It was like 2 days, um, and it was amazing. But I guess everybody was traveling at the time, so it's like fleeting, you
Yeah.
know. Things. But I remember
Yeah.
that I logged you and that I was like, "Oh, I am so fascinated. I would love to know your story." But I was always, you know, that moment was never right for me to go, "Ooh, tell me, are you mixed? And what da 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 da?" But I always those I don't know, those instances where I would meet somebody who was like, "Oh my god, I think they're like me," and then I desperately wanted
Yeah.
to know more about them. Um, do you have that, or am I the only one who has that?
Think at the time, probably not. I feel like my kind of understanding or my consciousness around my identity, I think, came a bit later, I think. I think it's something that I've explored more recently as an adult rather than, well, as a young adult. Obviously, it's always been something that I've been aware of, but I think it wasn't really something that I explored when I was younger. And then as I've got older and understood just more about life and the world, then I've kind of delved into it a little bit more. But I very much feel like I'm still on a journey in that respect and very much at the beginning of the journey.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's something that I kind of came to more in the in more recent years.
Was there anything that made you look at that part a little bit more than you had done before? Was there an event, or was it just aging and maturing?
Definitely that. I think, well, so I was adopted as a baby. And so I grew up in a white family. And so kind of I obviously always knew that I knew what my background was, but it wasn't really something that I explored very much because it almost felt a bit disrespectful in a way. When I was younger, or in my head, it felt disrespectful. And because I grew up in a white family and the area in which I lived in was very much like a kind of white middle class kind of area, there wasn't anybody else around me to really discuss that with, or who I felt like I could discuss that with. So although I sort of knew what my heritage was, it was just information rather than anything that I really explored in any depth. And then in my 20s, then yeah, my sort of I guess mid-20s, then I decided that I wanted to find my birth family. And so I found them. Um, and sort of only really then did I kind of start exploring a bit more into my heritage and my background. But still, it feels like I still don't know very much about it, and it's definitely something that I want to continue exploring and understanding more.
Is it difficult for you to talk about it?
I don't find it difficult to talk about. I think it's difficult to find the people to talk with it
Mm,
about who understand.
mm,
I think but also, I have a son who's nearly 14 now. His dad is from Cameroon. And so sort of raising a black son as well, it has added a different layer to the picture as well. Um, Sort of understanding that his experience might be different to my experience, and that's sort of, yeah, like another layer to. I didn't, I listened to some of your previous podcasts with your previous guests, and I heard you say on there, which I didn't
yeah.
realize at the time. Yeah.
Were you in your family unit with your adoptive parents, were you
Mm.
the only one or brothers and sisters? And
So I was the youngest, the only girl. I've got older brothers who are not adopted. I was the only girl, the only one that was adopted, and the only one who's mixed race as well. So
and
I think as a child that was quite difficult to get my head around, I think. I found that quite difficult growing up because this huge question of kind of identity and who I was always questioned all the time. And I felt from a really young age that I always had to sort of justify who I was to people, and I didn't really wanna answer those questions when I was little, um, because, I'd be out with my brothers or whatever, or I'd be with my parents, or we'd go to parents' evening, and there's always this, like, look between people, like, "How are you guys connected?" Or I'd be out with my brothers, or people would think that I was his girlfriend or something like that. It was not clear that we were siblings. And I still get that to a certain extent today. I care less about it now, but at the time when you're younger and these are huge questions, um, that felt quite difficult to me growing up.
was it a case where you just, like, did you give did you did it become performative to kinda give people what they wanted to hear, or did you just block it and was like, "I'm actually not interested in this, I'm not engaging with it," or how did you
I feel like I did always give the information because I didn't really know how not to. I think at the time as a kid, it's hard to, or, as a teenager, it's hard to put those boundaries in place sometimes. If someone throws a question at you, you're kind of just like, oh, I'll just answer it because I don't really know what else to say. But I always resented it a little bit. It always felt uncomfortable because people ask really personal questions that you just wouldn't ask other people.
Yeah.
And it felt like, I don't know you. Why do I want to give you this information? It's really personal, and yet you're delving into these really like deep parts of
Mm,
me that I don't necessarily want to talk to you about. So I feel like I did always give the information, but it always felt like uncomfortable. I didn't really like talking about it. And also, I didn't really have the answers at that age
yeah,
either.
yeah. So I was gonna say, so what type of question would somebody come to you just basically on face value, right? Someone would see you, it
Yeah,
would essentially jar them. They would
yeah,
come to you with the question, and you kinda have to explain it as a kid, or did your
yeah,
parents kind of
yeah.
shield you from that, or how?
A little bit, but then my parents would get faced with similar questions as well because people wouldn't assume that they were my parents. People would assume that, they were a friend or a nanny or, you know, something else. And so they definitely got faced with questions as well about, how is this your daughter kind of thing.
Mhm.
And yeah, as a kid, and I remember being at school and kids asking kind of, naive questions as you do when you're a kid. But I remember, classmates asking me like, why am I brown? Why am I black? I remember one of my friends, we were probably, I don't know, about six or something, but she asked me like, will I be white when I'm older and things like that. And I remember kind of getting faced with these questions and not really knowing what to say to people. And also I'd get questions about my hair. People would always make comments about my hair, um, or wanna touch my hair or play with it or whatever. And I remember my mum coming into school and doing like having to basically do like a bit of a talk in front of the class to like explain all these things to people to kind of sort of shield some of those questions from me. But then it kind of became, although I thought at the time that was good, but it was also a bit like embarrassing as well because suddenly then it became this massive thing that everybody knew about, and it's difficult to know like what the right way to handle those situations is. Like I don't who knows? I don't know what the right answer was, whether that was the right thing or not. That was my parents sort of trying to do what they thought was best at the time.
And was it quite small town setting, or was it a large
Yeah,
city?
fairly. No, I mean it technically is classed as a city, but it is, it's not like being in London or we lived about half an hour away from Birmingham, but it was very much not Birmingham. So Birmingham's got a huge Afro-Caribbean culture and population. So we sort of were on the edge of that. But where we actually lived and where I went to school and stuff, it was, a smallish kind of place where there wasn't a lot of diversity. I always remember being, pretty much the only mixed kid or black kid in school. And I, kind of have always felt like I've been in that position where you're like the only one in the room wherever you go. And that's quite hard sometimes, I think. Less so now
Yeah,
as an adult, but as a kid, sometimes it's quite
yeah,
difficult to kind of get your head around.
yeah. And what is your mix, if I may ask?
So my dad is Jamaican and my mom is English.
And how, when you mentioned in your mid to late 20s, when you go in search of that history and that
Mhm.
part of yours, um, can you share a little bit about what it is that you find about yourself, and if it's answered any of the questions that you've had for,
Yeah,
for a while?
yeah, sure. So I was adopted as a baby and I always knew that I was adopted, and it was also very obvious because, my family was white. But it's something that I've always known. It was never like a surprise to find out kind of thing. Um, and my parents at the time were always quite open about talking to me about it and answering questions and things like that. So it never felt like a sort of taboo topic. Um, and they always sort of said to me if I ever wanted to find them, then they would support that. Which so I always sort of had that knowledge growing up, and I knew very early on, I don't know from what age, but I always knew that I wanted to find them. That always felt important to me. Um, Maybe because I was mixed, maybe because I was growing up as the only girl, maybe because I felt like I didn't really know who I was, in terms of my identity, and didn't really have anyone to talk to about that who understood. But it always felt like quite a intuitive instinct to kind of, or there's no doubt in my mind that I want to find them at some point in my life. And I knew that I knew that it might not always be easy, or they might not want to know, or I didn't really know much about the situation. So my parents had sort of prepared me a little bit for it maybe not being this lovely, happy ending that I wanted it to be. So I did wait a little while. There were certain points in my life where I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to kind of take this on and deal with it if it isn't the outcome that I want it to be. So I'd sort of, yeah, I think around like 16 or 17, I kind of considered it. And then I found out some information, and then that was sort of enough for now. And then I got older, and life sort of happens. And I was uh, at the time I was dating my ex, and we were getting married, and I kind of wanted them in my head. I always wanted them to be around for my wedding, but it never sort of time wise that never really happened. And so I ended up getting married, and it was only after that that then I wanted to. I knew I was sort of ready to find them. But I lived abroad at the time. I lived in America, in California, and so it was a little bit tricky trying to find the right people to help me, and backwards and forwards with emails, and I wasn't in the same place, and so it took a little bit of time in that respect. But essentially, I contacted the local council where I knew that the adoption had taken place, and bounced around through a few different people to try and help me figure out what to do, because I really had no clear understanding of how I was actually going to find them or what I needed to do. But I got in touch with this woman, and she said, "Yeah, I can help." She asked me what information I knew already, and essentially had to fill out some forms. And then she went off and found them, basically. And then she contacted them and sent them letters and asked basically if they were happy for me to be in touch, and they said yes, and like separately as well. So my birth mum and dad were never really together. They weren't married or anything. So she contacted them separately. And I knew as well that I'd got a birth sister who is a little bit older than me, and I didn't really know where she was or, anything really about her. So, yeah, she contacted them. They said they were happy to be in touch, and then we exchanged letters for a while via her, which was amazing, really. We kind of wrote these letters back and forth because no one writes letters nowadays. Everything's done over
Yeah.
emails or text or whatever. And so it was really lovely to get, like, an actual proper letter, and I remember, like, seeing the handwriting, and that felt really special,
Mm.
and so we did that for a little while, exchanging letters, and we sent photos and pictures and things like that, and just learned a little bit about each other. So I got letters from my mum, I got letters from my dad, and then my sister kinda got brought into the mix as well, and so then I ended up exchanging letters with my sister too. And then it kinda just went from there. I was still living in America at that point, and a few months down the line, I was flying home because, there was a family, event that I was going to, so I flew home, and then I decided then that I would actually meet them, like, in person, and so that was amazing. It was really special, and I remember meeting, yeah, my birth mum, my birth dad, and my sister, and my sister's daughter at the time, and it was magic. I can't even put it into words really. Just everyone was a bit nervous, but I think for me, probably because I was the one that instigated it all, I did feel nervous, but I was more just excited than anything, and so when I met them, just it felt, and we've all said this, like, individually, but it all just felt completely normal after the initial, like, hellos and hugs and whatever, and then we just started chatting and talking. Everything just felt totally normal, like, nothing, like we were just hanging out at the weekends and nothing felt awkward. It was just so strange, like, we all just kind of slotted in. And yeah, it was amazing. And so, yeah, that was probably about 15 years ago now, probably. Maybe slightly less, but, trying to think when it was. 2011, I think. So, yeah, nearly 15 years ago. And yeah, so
So
we're all
it was
still in each other's lives.
the 3 of you in the same room?
Yeah,
Wow, and they
yeah.
hadn't seen like, your mom and dad hadn't seen each other in between that time either?
They had. So they had always sort of remained in touch kind of like loosely, because they still had my sister. My sister basically lived with my mum. My dad sort of flitted in and out a little bit. Um, and so but the thing is that the whole adoption had been a secret. And so my parents had hid this from pretty much everybody. And the only people that knew were my dad's brother, so my uncle, and then this mutual friend who lived across the hallway from them in the flats that they lived in at the time. They were the only two people that knew. And really, really weirdly, the woman that I was in touch with, who basically found them for me, turns out to be that same woman who lived across the hallway from them. So she was a friend of theirs because she lived next door to them or across the hallway. And then they sort of lost touch with her a little bit, but she then went on and became a social worker. And really weirdly, she was the person that I ended up speaking to. And so when I was in touch with her and I was telling her all these things, she was like, "I know who these people are. I know, I
That's
know who your
wild.
birth." Yeah. So she didn't tell me at the time, but she told me that afterwards, and I was like, "Oh my god." It's the weirdest coincidence because
Feel like this should
she
be a
was,
book.
yeah, I know. She was only one of 2 people that knew about the whole situation, and she ended up being the person that I spoke to and found them for me, so that is wild to me. But because it had all been a secret, when I did get in touch with them, they then had to tell my sister that she had got a sister that she knew nothing about. So that was I think that was quite difficult for my sister. Like, good, but really tricky for her to get her head around initially. And then they also then had to tell, like, all their family that there was this other kid that no one knew about. So there was yeah, there was sort of that dynamic as well.
Kinda have to take that story in. That is I mean, I guess on top of being adopted is an experience in itself, isn't it? I mean, you might
Mm,
know other people who are adopted as well, and they, parts of their story, synchronize with yours, but, I don't know how the element of mixed heritage adds a layer on top of that. I don't know if it does, maybe it doesn't, you know?
I think it I think it did for me anyway. I think it did because it felt like as for me, growing up knowing that I was adopted, I always felt a little bit alienated in a way from my adopted brothers and family. So it was always a huge thing that as a kid I kind of had to get my head around. Like that's a big topic to kind of understand as a young child in itself. And then I think with the added layer of being mixed race as well, you've got this obvious visually you are different from everybody as well. And I found that quite hard to deal with. And I think like my brothers looked quite similar to each other growing up, and so they it was always people were always making comments about like when they were younger they got comments about being twins, because they look so similar. And then growing up people would confuse the 2 of them, and so they always looked like each other, and then I was obviously a girl and mixed, and so I never looked like anybody, which sounds like a little thing, but I think when I did meet my birth family, that was massive to me to, like, look at someone who looked like me, and that felt unexpected in a way, like that was an unexpected thing that I didn't realize that I needed.
And how about 'cause, you have a British passport, you're raised in the British culture, your
Yeah,
adoptive parents are British, and your biological mum is British, but now you get a Jamaican heritage all of the sudden, you know,
yeah,
really thrown into the
yeah,
mix. I guess you've always known, like you say, your parents gave you
yeah.
that much information, but how was that?
I It always seems cool, in a way to have that information and that knowledge and that background because although it made me feel different in a way growing up, it also made me feel unique as well. So I was sort of had this kind of quiet proudness around it, but it was also something that I knew nothing about really as a child. And so when I did meet my birth family and the Jamaican side of my family, I felt really white. Like, I felt so like, although there was, like, a connection there because that is my roots and my heritage, but I also felt like a massive outsider as well, like, I didn't quite fit in or belong because, I talk differently to them. I don't have a Jamaican accent. Like I struggle sometimes to understand their Jamaican accent when they're all, chatting together. I don't know the food. I don't cook the food and I've not grown up around it. So all of those traditions and cultures, I just know nothing. And even now I don't know a lot about it. So there's almost like there's a proudness, but there's also a bit of, like, shame, I guess, on my side that I don't know more about it than I do. And
Mm.
so when people always ask that inevitable question about where you're from, I still hate answering it as an adult because I can tell them I'm from Jamaica, but that's where I want the conversation to end because I don't wanna delve into the conversation any deeper than that really with someone because I don't really know the answers, and I almost feel like not I'm not black enough, do you know what I mean, to kind of own that space, and I
Yeah.
think that's always been something that I've struggled to understand, being mixed, where you feel like you're too black to be white, but too white to be black. And there's this weird sort of space in the middle that's quite difficult to understand.
Yeah. I mean, you said that so honestly and so beautifully, and I recognize so much of myself in that as well.
Mm,
Even though I grew up with a mum who is from Cameroon and who brought, pieces of her culture into the home, and
mm,
even though my dad had lived there for a minute as well, so he also knew parts of the culture and the language and everything. But I remember the first time going to Cameroon and thinking, "I know nothing." Like,
yeah,
"What?" And funny enough, I mean, you felt white, and I was called white for the very first time when we went to Cameroon. I'd never in my life been called
yeah,
white. Like, "Oh my god,
yeah.
like, this is so confusing."
It
And
is
I
really
get it.
confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I get when
Yeah,
you say, I will give them the question, I'll say Jamaican, and then I just we need to move on from this right now because I have
yeah,
nothing more to give you.
yeah, yeah. Because sometimes then people will be like, "Oh, I've been to Jamaica and I know this and so and so lives there," and I'm like, "I've got nothing else to give you. I don't know any more information."
Exactly,
So
without almost
I feel
having
like
to then
whenever
yeah, without almost then having to go into your entire history, People
yeah, yeah,
assume something, it isn't that, and then how much do you owe them still as an explanation
exactly,
for
yeah,
that?
and it always just takes me back to being a kid and people asking those questions and always feeling like you've gotta justify yourself somehow or justify your story, which, when you're talking to someone random, you don't wanna you don't have to do that. And people don't generally do that in other circumstances, but because you are visually you look different, then people feel this entitlement to be able to ask really personal questions.
Yeah, and from both
Yeah.
sides, literally from both
Yeah.
sides, it's like, "Oh, I can't there's no place where I naturally slot in and where it feels calm, where I wouldn't get the
Yeah.
answers." I spoke to said Northern Africa, like Morocco. He was like, Morocco felt like, yeah, I can blend in here, but then people start talking like Arabic or something,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, actually, no,
Yeah.
still doesn't
Yeah.
work." And just because your sister then is mixed as well,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
does I mean, I don't know how much would speak to her about something like that, but is there a real difference in how she experiences it?
A little bit, like, because she grew up with my mum, my dad was kind of in her life, but not always consistently. She kind of grew up in the white culture as well. So there are similarities there, but I think my sister was then more engaged in the Jamaican side. Well, she was more engaged than me on the Jamaican side growing up. So she would, go and see our dad, or he's got a traditional Jamaican family where there's loads of siblings and cousins and, big family. So she would spend time with them. So she kind of, although she grew up with my mum, but she kind of that was also part of her normal as well. So I think she has said before actually that she feels similar in that she doesn't feel as Jamaican as the rest of the Jamaican family. But I think she kind of has been exposed to that more, so I think she feels more comfortable in that than I do.
Mm, yes. I know you're a midwife. Are
Mm.
you practicing?
Yeah, yeah, still practicing, yeah, yeah.
And I'm always curious to know, there's a lot of find probably questioning and soul searching and just to kind of balance these two polar opposites almost inside of you. But I do think that there's a huge benefit to being mixed somehow. And I think having to do the internal work by yourself almost, because no one else can help
Mm.
you with
Mhm.
it, I find. Um,
Yeah.
has it has you being you and all of these life lessons that you've learned through this, is there any way that it makes you a different midwife, or are there fields of midwifery that, interest you more due to your heritage? I mean, it sounds like a strange question, but I just wonder if there's any element of it that shows up in your work.
Yeah, I think I've often wondered why I became a midwife because I've always wanted to be a midwife from a really quite a young age. So probably at 13 or 14, like I knew I wanted to be a midwife. And then after that point, I'd never considered any other career path. And I kind of wonder where that stems from because I don't know any other midwives. There's no other midwives in my family. It's not like, it was something that was familiar to me. But I think probably being adopted, and I've always had this need for connection. I think that probably stems into it somewhere. This need to kind of nurture and mother and connect with people has always been really strong for me. So I think that probably subconsciously led me to being a midwife because in our role we do all of that. So I think it probably led me there in the first place. And I think the element of identity and race comes into that somewhere. I've always, not always, but in a lot of places that I've lived and a lot of places that I've practiced as a midwife, I've often been one of few either black or brown midwives wherever I've worked. And I find that interesting because in certain professions like nursing, for example, there's quite a lot of diversity within nursing and not so much within midwifery. So I find that interesting. But I think wherever I've worked, you know what, I think this only really hit me when I moved to America. So I got my license to practice in America and I lived over there for 5 years. And I think the idea of identity and race kind of became more obvious when I moved over there. I think racism is a bit more in your face, a bit more overt over there than it is here. Not that it doesn't exist here, but I think it's more overt over there. And in the practice that I worked in, people who were not white kind of gravitated towards me and wanted me to look after them and be their midwife because they felt there was something shared there, some
Mm,
commonality that maybe a white midwife would not understand. And that was I'd never really experienced that before or considered that to be a thing that someone might want that. I'd never really experienced that or realized that that was a thing, but it seemed to be quite a big thing over there. And the more I've learned about it, particularly in America, the statistics and the outcomes for Black women are far worse than they are for white women. And it is the same here in the UK too. But I don't think that I'd really kind of clocked that at the time.
mm,
So I do find that interesting. And I find it interesting here in the UK where, I mean, maternity outcomes in the US are shocking compared to, they spend the most on healthcare, and they have almost the worst outcomes in the Western world, which is shocking. Um, and here in the UK, we kind of think that we've got the NHS and, we're a Western country and you know, got a great system, but actually these issues still occur here too. And time after time, year after year, more and more reports come out that state exactly the same thing, that Black women, mixed women, Asian women have worse outcomes than white women. And it's year on year, nothing really seems to change. Black
mm,
babies have more chance of dying, they're born earlier, they generally have worse outcomes as well. So that for me feels quite shocking. And that's always something I've been interested in within midwifery. And I think, raising a Black son as well, these issues affect me and my community and my family, and it feels very personal.
Mm,
So yeah, that's definitely an area of midwifery that I am interested in and want to do something about, but obviously it's a huge topic and
it
not a
is.
simple problem to fix.
It is, but I often find myself wondering if people of mixed identity can be like bridges in spaces
Mm,
where you understand, or maybe like you say, you probably understand the white British part better, but you are seen by the other side of someone whom they can trust and can, latch on to as someone
yeah,
who wants to protect them, which is true. Both
yeah,
things are true, I think, from what I hear you say.
yeah.
And I think as such, you're probably in a unique position to be a sort of bridge.
I I I do think that to some extent, and I do think you're right. There's this notion of being closer to white, isn't there? And so I do think that is true. But I also think that my experience as a biracial woman is not the same as a black woman either. And I don't and again I don't these are sort of things that I hadn't really consciously thought about until recently. You know, when we think about racism or we think about the black experience, I kind of had always looped myself into that mix. But I read a book, I don't know if you've read it, but I read a book a couple of years ago now that's called Mixed slash Other. That's the title. And I read that book, and it's basically written by a woman who I think is a similar age to me. She's of mixed race. She's the same heritage as me. She's part Jamaican, part English. And it was basically all about her experience of being mixed race in the UK. And suddenly it was like, oh, yeah, like all these things that I've just grown up as thinking are normal suddenly were being echoed back at me, and someone else was saying them as well. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, that is being mixed is a different experience to being black and to being white as well. And I hadn't really ever thought about being mixed as a
Mm,
whole separate thing.
entity.
And I found that book fascinating. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
sort of kind of opened my eyes a little bit and made me aware of the differences. So there will be some similarities, obviously, but there are quite distinct differences as well.
Yeah, because when I hear you speak in this conversation, I hear you being quite, I don't know if it's careful, but I think it's aware that you say mixed and then you say black afterwards, or you say brown, black,
Mm,
because you make um, the distinction. And perhaps it is from reading that book, after that book, that I don't know, that you became aware of the nuances more within
yeah,
yourself and society.
and I feel quite aware that you know that my name, one of the most like English name in the world. My name is Sarah Smith. So couldn't get more English than that. And so I'm aware that, I don't have a name that obviously links to my heritage. So if my name is written on paper, people aren't going to assume that I'm part Jamaican. And I think about things like jobs, when you do a job a job application, and it always asks you what, you have to tick the box as to what your ethnicity is. And I know that, when you submit your CV to somewhere, there it will always be a bias somewhere from someone. And I feel like people who have got names that link them to their culture more, their ethnicity more, may well face a different experience than I face. I don't speak with a Jamaican accent. I don't, dress in the sort of traditional Jamaican clothes. So I know that there will be some privileges, if you like, that I will experience that other people won't. I've never had, I work in clinics and, no one's going to struggle with my name or no one's going to struggle how to pronounce my name or not know how to say it, or I don't have a language barrier here in the UK that other people would have to deal with. So I think, yeah, my experience will be different to other people's experiences. And I know that that will give me certain privileges that other people won't get, unfortunately.
Mm,
And
yeah,
even
I hear that.
my son is mixed technically, but to the world he looks black.
Mm,
So he's part Jamaican, part Cameroon, part English, but
mm,
the world won't see him that way. They won't see him as mixed. They will see him as black. And so he will there's elements where I look at my son and I think there's elements of his life that are similar to mine. And I know that he will experience things that are similar to me and how I grew up. Because again, I live in Devon. It's not the most diverse place to live. He will experience things in school that I probably experienced. There's elements of my childhood that I recognize in his, but he will be seen by the world as being black. Whereas
yeah,
I'm seen by the world as being white, not white, as being mixed. And so
yeah,
I know that his experience will be different, and he's male, and unfortunately, that's a difference as well.
yeah. I think I think about that a lot as well. And I remember years ago reading an article, it was in The Guardian, I think, and for the life of me, I can't remember who the actor was. To look at him, he was white, and people
Mm,
would approach him as a white man and sometimes talk derogatory, is that a word?
yeah, different.
Um, about black people to him because they just
Mm,
assumed from looking at
mm,
him that, he's full white, we all feel the same kind of thing. And he was actually like, for instance, my sister's children, who she married a white man, and her children look, very white, but they have a very,
mm,
brown mum and a black grandmother. And so I think we are having a generation of kids who are three-quarter mix of something, and like you say, the world will not know and will assume
mm.
many things that are completely wrong.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And that must be
Yeah,
really hard for them to navigate again, because for us, at least, some people can see that there's wait a minute, there's, like, multiple things in there.
yeah. I think so. And people say stupid things as well. Like people come out with wild comments sometimes. And I think being mixed, I think you kind of just touched on it where people assume things or they feel that they can safely say things to you. And sometimes they just come out with wild things and you're just like, wow, it's either really offensive or completely naive or what. But I find quite often it given the job that I do, I'm a midwife, around babies all the time, but sometimes people will be like, "Oh, I just love mixed babies." And you're like, "What a weird thing to say." Like, that's
Yeah.
such a
Yeah.
weird thing to say. But people feel that they can say that to me because I'm
Yeah.
mixed, and it's like, "Why are you saying that?" Like, it's such a weird thing to say. But they feel like they are connecting with me somehow, or they think that that's okay to say because I'm mixed, and they feel like they're on a level or saying something that's completely fine and acceptable, but actually they don't realize that it's that's really offensive to say. Like, it's such a strange, weird thing to say. Like, I don't go around being like, "Oh, I love white babies." Like, there's such an odd thing to say to someone.
It is. And I do think, yeah, I do think there is an element of truth in that. I have experienced that where people of both sides feel that they can say things to you because you are of them. I don't even know. I don't even really know how to explain it, but they, I guess, assume
Yeah.
because you're. I just don't even know how to say it, but it's because you're partly in their camp. Or I don't even know how to
Yeah.
say it, but
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I need to find vocabulary for
It's sort
that
of like
because
being
I don't actually have it.
it's sort of like that bridge that you explained before, isn't it? It's sort of like
Yeah,
you're this kind of bridge between the 2 worlds, and so somehow people think it's acceptable to say certain things to you that they wouldn't either
exactly.
say to a white person or they wouldn't say to a black person.
Yeah, but to walk that tightrope yourself is, like, really confusing. Like, I don't actually know how you want me to respond to this right now.
Yes, exactly, yeah, exactly.
Um, and thank you so much for, um, sharing your story and your experience. I honestly, really, really, really enjoyed our talk.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to do it. I love what you're doing. I love the idea of this podcast, and I think I listen, as I said, I listened to a couple of your episodes with some of your other guests, and I can't remember who it was, but someone asked you about kind of the reasons why you
Mm,
wanted to start this podcast, and you sort of hesitated over it for a little while. And I when you asked me to do it, my instant reaction was to say yes, because I think that it's really important to talk about, and we don't have enough conversations about these topics. But also, there was a part of me that was like, ooh, hesitant as well, because I don't always feel like I have the answers. And it's quite obviously quite a sensitive topic for many people, and you don't want to say the wrong thing and everything. But I think, we can only talk about our experiences. Our experiences are our own, aren't they? So we can own those and see if they relate to anyone else and how they connect. But I love what you're doing. I think it's a really interesting topic to get into with people, and everyone's experiences are so different. So yeah, being asked. So thank you for inviting me to do it.